Alright, so today we're going to talk about counting atoms. We are still in Unit 3, which we started by learning about pure substances and mixtures. So we're going to take a moment to remember our two types of pure substances. So first we have elements. Elements are pure substances represented by a chemical symbol. Elements are found on the periodic table of elements. Compounds are pure substances made of two or more elements chemically bonded together. Chemical compounds are represented by chemical formulas. A chemical formula looks like this. So here's an example of a chemical formula. All of the different parts of a chemical formula that we're going to talk about. But first, a chemical formula represents the elements and number of atoms that make up a substance. So for instance, this formula down here has Al, which is aluminum, S, which is sulfur, and O, which is oxygen. And then we're going to talk about what all of these numbers and what the parentheses mean as well. But essentially all of these numbers tell us how many atoms make up this particular substance, this molecule. So we're actually going to start down here in the bottom corner talking about element symbols. So element symbols are the thing that are found on the periodic table. These tell you which elements are in the compound.
Good morning.
Hey. Sorry, that was Miss Simon. So it tells you which elements are in the compound. Element symbols can be one capital letter, so for example, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, these are all element symbols where they're just represented by one capital letter, or they can be one capital letter and one lowercase letter. For example, aluminum, which is Al, Si, which is silicon, Mg, magnesium. It's really important to pay attention to when you have a capital letter by itself or when you have a capital letter and a lowercase letter. Sometimes, especially in the case of aluminum and chlorine, where there's an L, which can sometimes look like a capital I, you have to pay really close attention. So Al, I'm going to put a triangle around it. This is the element symbol. So S is also an element symbol, and O is also an element symbol. And this is different than if there was, say, a capital S and a lowercase o, which to my knowledge is not an actual element symbol. But if it was, that would be different than capital S and capital O. Next, we're going to talk about subscripts, because these are the next most important thing after the element symbols. Subscripts are the little numbers, the small numbers. And these tell you how many atoms of an element you have in a compound. So it tells you how many atoms of an element you have in a compound. So for instance, Al2 SO4, and then we'll talk about what this 3 outside of these parentheses means. But here's something that's super duper important to know. I'm going to put 3 stars next to it so that we know that it's important. If there is no subscript on an element, so for instance, sulfur right here doesn't have a subscript. If there is no subscript on an element, you have to know that that is equal to 1 and not 0. If it was 0, we wouldn't have written the element at all. So it has to be 1. So next we're going to talk about the parentheses. So when you are in your math class and you do PIMDAS, parentheses is basically saying you're only doing this separate part of the equation by itself. When you do PIMDAS, you do parentheses first. You take care of everything inside of the parentheses first. And that's the same thing with chemical formulas. This is kind of beyond the scope of this class, but you'll need to know it when you go into your higher level chemistries, if you do. But parentheses indicate groups within the molecule. Oops, within the molecule. That's just a typo right there, so ignore that. So parentheses indicate groups of atoms within the molecule. Sorry, within the that's fine. Parentheses indicate groups of atoms within the molecule or compound. Basically, it's saying that SO4, one sulfur and 4 oxygens, these things are grouped together inside of this whole compound. So when they're bonded, these parentheses tell us something about how an element is bonded, or how an atom is bonded together. Here's the important thing that you need to know. The subscript outside of the parentheses, so this 3 for instance, multiplies to everything inside. So this 3 will end up distributing to this O and to this S, which we'll talk about more later. Finally, we have the coefficients. The coefficients are the big numbers. And they tell you how many molecules of a particular compound you have. So this would say that we have 5 Al2SO4 3s. Coefficients multiply everything. So if this 3 only distributes to this 4 and this 1, this 5 is going to distribute to every number in the compound, which again we'll talk about in a little bit. But it's important that we know what all of these parts are. So make sure that you have all of these written down.